You will not believe what happens to the girl at the end. Make sure to like and subscribe so we can continue writing stories like this one. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.
Prairie shadows. The prairie grass sighed under the breeze, a dismal tune mirroring the hollowness in Sarah's chest. Each gust felt like Thomas's absent embrace, a spectral touch on her skin. She'd forgone somber black, azure, the color of prairie skies he loved, cloaked her instead. But the fabric felt like lead, a physical manifestation of bereavement. Lowering the brim of her bonnet, she sought refuge from the sun's relentless glare. The wagon trail, nearly swallowed by the landscape, hinted at a world beyond this ocean of green and gold. 3 days. 3 days she'd been retracing her steps from Oakhaven's solicitor, 3 days since relinquishing everything she and Thomas had cultivated, save for their modest claim. The railroad's settlement was an outrage, a measly reward for years of grueling effort. Yet, without Thomas, the farm was an impossibility. The lawyer's sympathy, though well-intentioned, echoed the chorus of condolences she'd endured. A clean slate, Mrs. Meadowsweet. A chance to rebuild. But Sarah craved no such thing. She yearned for the life that had been, a life where Thomas's whistle echoed from the fields, his mirth dancing on the wind. A hawk spiraled above, its piercing cry slicing through the stillness. Envy tugged at her as she observed its effortless flight, its panoramic view. Her existence felt constricted, limited to the dust-caked path beneath her feet. She recalled their wedding, Thomas's hands, weathered yet tender, as he slid the unassuming gold band onto her finger. He'd vowed a life brimming with joy. The sun shone, yes, but laughter had evaporated with his final breath. As the sun began its descent, daubing the horizon with vivid shades of apricot and rose, Sarah knew she needed respite. Her eyes swept the landscape, seeking a familiar marker, a cluster of trees, anything to alleviate the uniformity. She contemplated returning to a small thicket encountered earlier, but the idea of retracing her path felt unbearable. Driven by a primal need, she pressed onward, her destination a desolate home. An abrupt crack shattered the silence. Sarah halted, her pulse quickening. Not the wind. Something else entirely. She strained, attempting to pinpoint the origin. Another snap, drawing nearer. She whirled around, scanning the towering foliage, but saw nothing. A creeping dread seized her. She broke into a run, her voluminous skirt hindering her stride. A guttural growl resonated behind her, sending a jolt of ice down her spine. This was no animal. A hand then seized her mouth, stifling her scream. An arm constricted her waist, dragging her down. She fought, struggling against her assailant's strength. A pungent cloth pressed against her face, the biting odor searing her nostrils. She choked, gasping for air. A savage blow to the head ignited a constellation of pain behind her eyes. The taste of blood filled her mouth, metallic and repulsive. The world swam, dissolving into a distorted blur. Her body felt leaden, unresponsive. And then the excruciating pain came. A searing, white fire that ripped through her eyes, extinguishing the light, leaving nothing but shadow. Her muffled cry vanished into the vastness. Her assailant released her, melting back into the prairie. Sarah lay motionless, struggling to breathe, her face pressed against the cold, damp earth. Her eyes felt swollen, ablaze. She could not see. Only darkness. Tears mingled with blood and soil, streaking her face. She was utterly and irrevocably alone, blind and helpless. The wind whispered through the grass, now sounding like a cruel taunt. Nausea overwhelmed her as she tried to rise. She remained prone, disoriented and terrified, the prairie a vast, unblinking witness to her agony. A shadow swallowed whole by the plains, broken and isolated. The heavens deepened, stars emerging to pierce the darkening canvas. Sarah closed her lids, yearning to dissolve into the earth. Yet, even in the depths of despair, a flicker of defiance sparked within. She would not die here. She would endure, somehow. A helping hand. The wind carried the scent of drying grasses and distant rain as Silas Harding guided his Appaloosa mare, Cricket, through the tall prairie grass. He was tracking a stray heifer, lost from his small herd, his weathered face etched with the patience of a man accustomed to the land's whims. The sun beat down even this late in the afternoon, turning the horizon into a shimmering haze. He scanned the undulating landscape, his eyes missing nothing. A hawk circling overhead, the disturbed earth near a badger hole, the glint of something unnatural in the distance. He urged Cricket forward, his curiosity piqued. As he drew closer, the glint resolved itself into a crumpled form, partially obscured by the swaying grass. Dismounting, Silas approached cautiously, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle slung across his back. It was a woman. She lay still, her dress torn and stained, her face turned away. Silas knelt beside her, his touch gentle as he rolled her onto her back. Her eyes were swollen and bloodied, covered by a crude bandage. He recognized the signs immediately. A deliberate, brutal blinding. A wave of anger, cold and unfamiliar, washed over him. He hadn't seen such cruelty in these parts for a long time. Who would do this? And why? He checked for a pulse, finding it weak but steady. She was alive. That was all that mattered for now. He had to get her out of the sun. Carefully, Silas lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, almost fragile. Cricket shifted nervously at the unfamiliar weight, but Silas soothed her with a soft word and a gentle pat. He settled the woman across the mare's back, securing her as best he could with his coat. He then led Cricket back towards his cabin, his gaze constantly sweeping the horizon, alert for any sign of pursuit. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon by the time they reached his small homestead. His cabin, built of rough-hewn logs, stood as a testament to his solitary existence. A small corral held his remaining cattle, and a meager vegetable garden struggled against the dry earth. It wasn't much, but it was home. He carried the woman inside, laying her gently on his cot. The cabin was sparsely furnished, a rough table, a couple of chairs, a wood-burning stove. But it was clean and dry, offering a haven from the harsh elements. Silas fetched water from the well and began to clean her wounds, his movements efficient and practiced. He'd seen his share of injuries, both on the range and during his time with the cavalry. The bleeding had stopped, but the damage was extensive. He doubted she would ever see again. As he worked, the woman stirred, moaning softly. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice raspy. "Thomas, is that you?" Silas paused, his heart aching for her. "No," he said gently. "My name is Silas. You're safe now." She flinched at the sound of his voice, her body tensing. Where am I?" "You're at my cabin," he replied, continuing to clean her wounds. "You were hurt. I found you on the prairie." She remained silent for a long moment, then a shudder racked her body. They took everything," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. Silas didn't press her. He knew she would tell him what she wanted to when she was ready. For now, he focused on tending to her injuries. He applied a poultice of herbs to her eyes, hoping to ease the swelling and prevent infection. When he was finished, he offered her some water. She drank greedily, then lay back, exhausted. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Rest," Silas said. "You need to regain your strength." He moved away from the cot, giving her space. He knew she was scared, confused, and grieving. He couldn't imagine what she had been through. He banked the fire in the stove and prepared a simple broth of beans and dried meat. He didn't expect her to eat, but he had to offer. As darkness fell, Silas sat by the window, his rifle within easy reach. The prairie was quiet, save for the mournful howl of a coyote in the distance. He kept watch, his mind racing. He didn't know who had attacked this woman or why, but he knew one thing: he wouldn't let them hurt her again. He would protect her even if it meant risking his own life. He couldn't explain why. He just knew it was the right thing to do. Darkness and doubt? The first sensation to register was olfactory, not the honeyed perfume of wildflowers nor the keen anticipation of rain on the wind, but a blend of hearth fire and turned earth, laced with the scent of drying herbs. Sounds followed, the measured pulse of a clock, a distant crow's lament, and the soft cadence of nearby breath. Panic seized her. Where was she? Why was she shrouded in darkness? Tentatively, she extended a hand, her fingertips encountering the nubby texture of woven cloth. A blanket. She lay in a bed, unfamiliar and small. Her pulse quickened to a frantic drumbeat. She pushed herself upright, a strangled gasp escaping. "Easy now," a voice rumbled, a deep timbre edged with kindness. "Unfamiliar. Where am I?" she managed, her voice raspy. The last coherent memory, a searing flash, then oblivion. "You're safe," the voice reassured. "At my cabin." Cabin. Safe. The words offered no solace, ringing hollow. I can't see," she breathed, the realization a physical blow. The silence that followed was profound. Then a sigh stirred the air. "I know." Tears, hot and futile, tracked down her temples. "Blind. Everything stolen." "How? What happened?" she choked. "I found you on the prairie," the voice answered. "Not far from my property. You were injured." Injured? A vast understatement given the agonizing blankness behind her eyes, now pressed futilely with her fingers. She could only meet this endless void. Silas, she learned, was his name. Patient, he offered water, coaxed her to eat a bland, unappetizing porridge. He described the cabin's layout in gentle tones, orienting her within the close confines. Yet despair clung to her like a shroud. Useless. A mere burden. She who had taken such pride in her self-reliance in managing the farm after Thomas was now utterly dependent. The following morning she sought to contribute. Silas, attending the fire with efficient movements, represented a normalcy she craved. She pushed herself up, determined to prove she wasn't entirely devoid of worth. "Let me assist," she offered, reaching for a log. "Rest is best," Silas countered, his voice gentle but firm. "There must be something I can do," she insisted, grasping at the wood. Misjudging the distance, her fingers slipped, the timber crashed to the floor, scattering hot embers. Silas sighed softly. "Sarah, please." Mortification flooded her. She sank back onto the bed, tears stinging. What use was she now? Later, Silas, hoping to offer an achievable task, presented a bowl of mixed beans, pintos, blacks, and kidneys, a jumbled mosaic. She sifted through them, attempting to differentiate by touch alone. Her fingers, clumsy and uncoordinated, betrayed her. More beans cascaded to the floor than landed in their designated piles, scattering like tiny, mocking stones. "I can't," she cried, shoving the bowl away. "I can't do anything right." Silas knelt beside her, his presence a strange anchor in the swirling chaos. "These things take time," he encouraged. "You'll adapt." "No, I won't," she sobbed, voice thick with hopelessness. "I'm a failure. I was barely afloat before. And now, I'm nothing but a burden." He enclosed her hand in his calloused palm offering warmth and strength. "You are not a burden, Sarah." "Then what am I?" she whispered, her voice frail. "What good am I?" Silas hesitated, his silence offering a strange, unexpected comfort. Finally, his words, grave and sincere, broke through the despair. "You're alive, Sarah. And that has to be enough for now." "Learning to see." "Palm out," Silas murmured, his breath warm near her ear. Sarah presented her hand, a tremor dancing through it. He laid a leaf across her skin. "Its texture will tell you stories." Her fingertips explored the surface. A coarse tapestry, almost like cured hide, its veins raised like miniature mountain ranges. "It's substantial," she finally offered, seeking the right descriptor. "Sagebrush, ubiquitous here. Bruise it a bit." She paused, then delicately crumpled the leaf. An assertive, clean fragrance erupted. "Oh," she breathed, inhaling deeply. "Medicinal, bracing." "Exactly. We begin with the obvious. Now this one." Silas repositioned her hand, guiding her to a different plant, its leaves yielding and supple. "Rabbit brush. Silken, yes? Velvety almost. Come fall, it will explode with yellow blossoms. A sight you'll have to imagine for now." Sarah dedicated the morning to deciphering the language of leaves. Chamomile, a cascade of delicate, fern-like tendrils. Yarrow dissected into countless fine segments. Missteps were frequent, one texture blurring into another, but Silas remained a steady presence, his voice a reassuring constant in her newly shadowed world. He patiently repeated names, painted vivid olfactory portraits, fostering the construction of a tactile map of the terrain surrounding the cabin. By noon, her fingers were dyed verdant and imbued with fragrance, and a tender bloom of accomplishment unfurled within her chest. Later, Silas ushered her towards the shed where he stockpiled provisions. The air within hung heavy with the powdery scent of wheat and maize. He deposited a mound of kernels into her awaiting hand. "Bread demands flour. Allow me to demonstrate." The grinding stone was burdensome, unwieldy. Silas overlaid her hands with his, demonstrating the circular motion, the precise pressure needed to pulverize the grain. The task unfolded slowly, demanding stamina. Her muscles protested, and a film of perspiration dotted her forehead. Yet, with each rotation of the stone, she forged a link to the process, a feeling of genuine contribution swelling within her. "You're progressing well," Silas's voice, unexpectedly intimate, resonated near her ear. She hadn't registered his approach. "Maintain even pressure." She channeled her focus into his counsel, the sensation of the stone beneath her palms, the granular consistency of the flour accumulating in the basin. The world contracted to the small, attainable undertaking. The chickens presented a unique challenge. They erupted in panicked flight at her proximity, a cacophony of squawks and flapping wings. Sarah recoiled at the sudden burst of sound, her hands instinctively rising in defense. "Easy now," Silas soothed, his tone calming. "Merely high-strung. Extend your hand. I'll portion some feed into it." She hesitated, then offered her open palm. Silas filled it with grain. The chickens cautiously advanced, their tiny eyes gleaming with avarice. One delivered a tentative peck to her fingers. Sarah gasped, withdrawing her hand sharply. Silas chuckled softly. Harmless, only motivated by hunger. Try again. Repeated attempts were necessary, but eventually, Sarah managed to maintain a steady hand, allowing the chickens to partake from it. A peculiar sense of victory washed over her as their beaks brushed her skin. They remained boisterous, unpredictable, yet she was mastering the art of navigating their domain, claiming her space within it. As days lengthened into weeks, Sarah attuned herself to the subtle signatures of Silas's presence. The groan of floorboards announcing his movements within the cabin. The steady percussion of the axe as he amassed firewood. The quiet drone that sometimes escaped his lips as he worked. She differentiated his footfalls from the whisper of leaves, his personal aroma, a blend of campfire smoke and earth from the pristine atmosphere of the prairie. One twilight, as they sat companionably by the fire's glow, Sarah extended her hand. Silas? Yes, Sarah? His voice gentle and unhurried. She faltered, then grasped his hand in hers. His skin was rough, weathered, yet his hold was steadfast, reassuring. Thank you, she murmured. For everything. He offered a gentle squeeze. No thanks needed, Sarah. You're thriving. But she understood it transcended mere survival. He was not solely assisting her in enduring. He was guiding her toward renewed living, toward rediscovering her path in a world rendered invisible. And in that act, he was illuminating for her, and perhaps for himself, the authentic definition of sight. Whispers of the wind. The wind had become Sarah's eyes. She felt its subtle shifts, its playful tugs at her hair, its mournful sighs through the tall grasses. Today, the wind carried a different tale, a low thrumming against her skin that spoke of a storm brewing far to the west. She was kneeling by the chicken coop, scattering feed. The familiar weight of the grain in her hand, the soft clucking and pecking around her feet, brought a sense of calm. Silas usually handled this chore, but yesterday he'd shown her the rhythm of it, the amount of feed to scatter, the way to avoid getting nipped by a particularly bold hen. Today she was doing it alone. A surge of pride warmed her. It was a small thing, feeding chickens. But it was hers. She heard Silas chopping wood near the cabin. The rhythmic thud of the axe usually soothed her, but today it felt jarring, out of sync with the low hum she felt in the air. Silas, she called, her voice barely audible above the wind. He stopped chopping. Sarah? Everything all right? The chickens are fed, she announced, a small victory in her voice. But I think there's a storm coming. Silas chuckled. Storm? The sky's clear as a bell. I can feel it, she insisted, turning her face towards the unseen horizon. A heavy feeling, like the air is holding its breath. Silas was silent for a moment. He trusted her instincts, honed by necessity. He walked over to her, wiping his brow with a calloused hand. He scanned the sky, his gaze sweeping across the vast expanse of prairie. Still, nothing. Just the endless blue. Maybe you're right, he conceded, though doubt lingered in his tone. Best be prepared, just in case. He spent the next hour securing loose items around the cabin, bringing in firewood, and checking the roof for any weaknesses. Sarah, meanwhile, helped him gather the laundry from the clothesline, carefully folding each piece with a newfound dexterity. As they finished, a low rumble echoed in the distance. Silas looked up, his eyes widening. The western sky, once clear, was now bruised with purple clouds. The wind, no longer a gentle whisper, howled like a banshee. By thunder, you were right, he said, his voice filled with awe. How did you know? Sarah shrugged, a smile playing on her lips. The wind told me. The storm hit with a fury. Rain lashed against the windows and the wind shrieked around the corners of the cabin. Sarah and Silas sat by the fire, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. The air crackled with electricity. Sarah listened to the storm, her senses heightened. She heard the frantic chirping of birds seeking shelter, the creaking of the old cabin as it strained against the wind, the relentless drumming of rain on the roof. It was chaos, but it was also life. Silas watched her, his gaze filled with a mixture of wonder and gratitude. He had saved her, yes, but she was teaching him something profound. She was showing him that sight was not the only way to see, that the world was full of whispers and signs, waiting to be heard and felt. As the storm raged outside, a sense of peace settled over them. They were safe together in their small haven. The wind howled, but inside there was warmth and a growing connection that transcended words. Later, as the storm began to subside, Sarah reached out and touched Silas's arm. "Thank you, Silas," she said softly. "For everything. For not giving up on me." He covered her hand with his. "You're the strongest woman I know, Sarah," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You don't need me to see your worth." "I wouldn't have found it without you," she replied, her voice thick with gratitude. I feel like I'm starting to see things too. Not with my eyes, but in a different way. I feel stronger, more confident." She paused and a smile touched her lips. "The wind told me that too." Flames on the horizon. The sun blazed, a relentless force drawing the last dregs of moisture from the parched earth. Sarah knelt by the vegetable patch, her touch gentle as she identified the tender beginnings of beans and squash. Silas, farther off, wrestled with a section of fence battered senseless by the recent gales. Yesterday's playful zephyr had become a fretful tormentor, swirling about Sarah, snatching at her hair and pelting her skin with biting grit. She grimaced, a strange, metallic taste clinging to her palate. "Silas," she called, her voice thin against the rising wind. "The air, it's tainted." Silas straightened, swiping his brow with a soiled kerchief. He peered at the unblemished sky. "Just the dry spell talking, Sarah. Nothing to fret about. This land's always thirsty." He strained at the fence post, muscles bulging. But unease coiled within Sarah. This was more than just aridity, it was a harsh, stinging scent underscored by something akin to embers. She rose, facing into the wind, attempting to parse its message. "It's more than that, Silas. I smell smoke." Silas waved off her concern. "Smoke? Likely someone burning off deadfall. Happens all the time." He renewed his efforts on the fence, hammer blows echoing. Sarah hesitated, but the gale howled, swallowing her words. Still, she inhaled deeply, willing herself to trust her instincts. The acrid tang sharpened, mingling with the dust to form a suffocating haze. Then she registered it, a deep, crackling rumble like some ravenous beast stirring in the distance. "Silas," she cried, urgency sharpening her tone. "Silas, please. I hear fire." The pitch in her voice finally pierced his focus. He dropped the hammer, turning to her, questioning etched on his face. He scanned the horizon, squinting against the glare. Initially, only the endless sea of prairie grass met his gaze, shimmering in the heat. But then a dark smear marred the distance, a stain spreading across the canvas of the sky. "Smoke!" A curse escaped his lips. "Prairie fire!" A flicker of panic sparked in his eyes, quickly eclipsed by hard resolve. "Sarah, we need the creek. Now!" He seized her hand, his grip vice-like, and steered her towards the slender ribbon of water winding through their property's rear. The wind intensified to a screaming tempest, spitting embers that pirouette like malevolent sprites. The reek of burning grass and timber choked the air, thick and cloying. Retreating from the cabin, the smoke thickened, blotting out the sun and bathing the prairie in an unsettling orange luminescence. Silas coughed, tears streaming down his face. The heat intensified, radiating from the unseen conflagration like a furnace door thrown open. He faltered, his hold on Sarah's hand momentarily broken. "Silas?" Sarah called, her voice trembling, barely a breath. He recovered, his face gaunt and smudged with soot. Disorientation gripped him, the smoke playing tricks with his vision, blurring the familiar landscape. The creek seemed impossibly distant, a cruel mirage. I can't see straight," he rasped, his voice raw. "The smoke." He staggered, losing his footing. The world swam, a dizzying carousel of smoke and flame. Sarah felt his grip weaken. She stopped, pivoting towards him, her senses heightened to compensate for his failing sight. The fire was audible now, a ravenous roar devouring all before it. Its heat licked at her skin, its destructive force bearing down. Silas was faltering, consumed by the smoke and heat. He was lost, and she was his only compass. A guiding voice. The oppressive heat bore down, a tangible weight that robbed them of breath. Silas choked, a raw, grating sound tearing from his throat. Everything's a blur," he managed, his voice raspy with smoke. "Sarah, I'm lost." His fingers clamped around hers, a desperate clutch that betrayed his earlier composure. Irony hung thick in the air, the one without sight now completely reliant on the sighted. But Sarah knew, with gut-wrenching clarity, his vision was gone, consumed by the ravenous gray maelstrom that surrounded them. "Silas, listen," she said, her tone remarkably steady, even surprising herself. "We have to move. Now. Where does the wind feel strongest?" He hesitated, his breathing shallow and ragged. "That way? Towards the creek, maybe?" Sarah gave a slight, firm shake of her head. "No. The wind's fickle. It's southerly now. The creek would be a death trap." She registered the voracious crackle of the fire, an insatiable predator devouring the prairie. An acrid blend of burning sage and parched earth assaulted her senses. sharp and biting. But underlying that, a subtle whisper in the air, a pocket of cooler air suggesting a less ravaged path. West, she insisted, toward the rock face. Remember, it's open on the far side. A small break. Another cough racked him, a violent spasm that convulsed his frame. The outcropping. It's further. I don't know if I can do this. You have to, she replied, her voice unwavering. I'll guide you. Trust me, Silas. Please. His answering squeeze was a silent pledge. Okay, Sarah. You lead. Drawing a deep breath, she fought the burn in her throat and the sting in her eyes. Instead, she channeled sound, the subtle shift in air currents, the tremors beneath her soles. The fire roared to their right, a terrifying orchestra of destruction. She tugged Silas forward, away from the fiery brink. Easy, she cautioned. Fallen log straight ahead. Careful step. He faltered, regained his footing. How did you know? I can hear the ground changing, she explained, her focus absolute. And the air feels different near anything solid. They pressed onward, the smoke a caustic shroud, searing their lungs. The heat intensified, blistering her skin. She zeroed in on maintaining a measured stride, Silas close at her side. She sought out familiar oral markers from their past walks, wind whispering through the tall grass, the almost imperceptible murmur of a spring, the changing timbre of the soil beneath their feet. Left, she directed, steering him from a patch of crackling undergrowth. Stay tight. Drop off there. He complied without question, his faith absolute. A surge of strength coursed through her, a fierce resolve to shield him, to lead them both to salvation. No longer the helpless creature he'd found on the prairie, she was now his compass, his sight within the storm. The very air grew dense, each inhalation a battle. Silas coughed incessantly, his steps weakening. Sarah, I don't know. Can't. Just a little more, she coaxed, her voice tight but resolute. I can smell the rocks. Almost there. Dragging him onward, her muscles screaming, her lungs ablaze. The ground inclined, the rough texture of stone scraping at their boots. Heat radiated off the rock, but she also caught the slight alteration of the wind, the promise of a clearing just beyond. Then, at last, they were through. They staggered into the pocket of rock, a haven of muted chaos amidst the inferno. Flames still fringed the edges, but the air was cleaner, the heat less savage. Silas collapsed, hacking, gulping for air. Sarah knelt beside him, her own lungs afire. Safe for the moment. He grasped her hand, his hold tenuous yet filled with gratitude. You saved us, Sarah, he croaked. I don't know what I'd have done. Sarah squeezed his hand, tears pricking her eyes. We saved each other, Silas, she whispered. We saved each other. Rising from the ashes. The air tasted of ash and loss. Sarah stood, Silas beside her. The rough stone of the outcropping still warm against her back. The sun, a muted presence behind the smoke, offered little comfort. The homestead, once a testament to Silas's hard work, was now a blackened skeleton against the prairie. The barn. Silas's voice was thick with grief, his hand gripping Sarah's arm. The animals. Sarah swallowed, the image of the frantic bleating of sheep echoing in her mind. We're alive, Silas. That's what matters. She squeezed his hand in return, the calluses on his palm familiar and reassuring. He made a choked sound, then released her. I need to see. He started forward, stumbling slightly. Silas, wait. Sarah reached for him, her fingers brushing his sleeve. It's not safe. Let me. She hesitated, then took a deep breath. Let me be your eyes? He stopped, his head bowed. The acceptance in his posture was a heavy weight on Sarah's heart. She moved forward cautiously, her bare feet sensitive to the uneven ground. She catalogued the scene for him, the charred remains of the barn, the twisted metal of his tools, the acrid smell of burnt wood mingling with the faint sweetness of singed grass. The house is still standing, she announced, relief flooding her voice. Damaged, but standing. The fire didn't reach the root cellar either. Silas followed her voice, his steps slow and hesitant. They reached the house, its walls blackened but intact. The roof sagged in places and the windows were shattered. Sarah ran her hands along the rough-hewn logs, feeling for structural damage. As they stood there, assessing the devastation, a sound reached them, the distant creak of wagon wheels. Sarah strained her ears. Wagons, she said. Coming from the north. Silas lifted his head, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Neighbors? Soon, 3 wagons lumbered into view, their occupants grim-faced but determined. Martha and Thomas Abernathy were in the lead, followed by young Samuel Miller and his wife, Ruth, and old Mr. Peterson, his wagon piled high with tools and lumber. "Silas," Martha called out, her voice cracking with emotion. "We saw the smoke." They descended from the wagons, their faces etched with concern. Martha rushed to Silas, embracing him tightly. Thomas clapped him on the shoulder, his gaze sweeping over the ruined homestead. "We brought what we could," Thomas said, gesturing to the wagons. "Food, tools, lumber. We'll help you rebuild, Silas. You're not alone." Relief washed over Sarah, so profound it almost brought her to her knees. She had felt so isolated, so helpless. But now, seeing these people, their faces filled with compassion, she knew they weren't alone. "Thank you," Silas rasped, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you all." As the neighbors began unloading the wagons, a sense of purpose settled over Sarah. She might be blind, but she wasn't useless. She could organize, she could direct, she could inspire. "Martha," she said, her voice clear and strong, "can you and Ruth start sorting through the salvaged food in the root cellar? See what's still edible." Martha, surprised but receptive, nodded. "Of course, Sarah." "Thomas, Mr. Peterson," Sarah continued, "can you assess the damage to the barn and the house? Determine what materials we need to rebuild." She paused, thinking quickly. "Samuel, perhaps you could start clearing the debris around the well? We'll need water." The neighbors looked at Sarah with newfound respect. She, the blind woman, was taking charge, her voice filled with authority and determination. They moved quickly, responding to her instructions, their initial shock giving way to a shared sense of purpose. Silas watched Sarah, his heart swelling with pride. He had given her shelter, but she was giving him so much more in return. He saw not a broken woman, but a leader, a beacon of hope in the ashes of despair. He realized that her blindness hadn't diminished her, it had amplified her other senses, sharpened her mind, and revealed a strength he never knew she possessed. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ravaged landscape, the homestead buzzed with activity. The sounds of hammering and sawing filled the air, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Sarah stood at the center of it all, her ears attuned to every sound, her hands guiding and directing. That night, they ate a simple meal of salvaged beans and hardtack, gathered around a crackling fire. The faces around the fire were tired but resolute. They had a long road ahead of them, but they were together. As Sarah drifted off to sleep, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, she thought of the fire. It had taken so much, but it had also revealed something new. The unwavering support of a community, and her own hidden strength. They would rise from the ashes, stronger and more resilient than before. She knew it in her heart. A shared horizon. The cadence of hammers rang out, a steady heartbeat against the sighing prairie grasses. Sarah's cabin was taking shape with remarkable speed, a testament to the community's spirit and her own unassuming command. Near the raw doorway, she stood enveloped in the sharp tang of sawn lumber, directing a neighbor as he maneuvered a plank into place. Her fingers traced the wood's surface, searching for flaws. "Just a hair high on this end, Mr. Abernathy," she murmured. The farmer, a man built solid by years of toil, adjusted the timber without protest. Initially skeptical of a blind woman's contribution, he'd been swiftly won over by her meticulous memory, her innate spatial awareness, and her gift for coordination. Silas watched from the edge of the construction, leaning against a freshly raised wall. He noticed her constant activity, a composed presence amidst the flurry. The metamorphosis astonished him. Gone was the terrified, shattered woman rescued from the ruins. The inferno, in its brutal way, had tempered her, unveiling a reservoir of strength he hadn't imagined. A warmth close to pride stirred within him, a sensation long suppressed. As dusk painted the prairie in hues of lavender and rose, the hammering subsided. The neighbors, tired yet fulfilled, congregated for a humble supper of stew and bread. The joyful chatter felt like a balm to Sarah, a sound absent for an age. Once the last well-wisher had departed, promising to return at sunrise, Sarah and Silas found themselves alone. The cabin's skeleton stood stark against the fading light, a beacon of hope for a new chapter. Slowly, deliberately, Sarah moved toward Silas. The air, now crisp, carried hints of wood smoke and damp soil. "It's extraordinary, Silas," she whispered, emotion lacing her tone. "I never believed." After the blaze, Silas moved to her side, gently taking her arm and guiding her to a nearby tree stump. They settled into a comfortable quiet, punctuated only by the cricket's evening song. "They did it for you, Sarah," Silas finally offered, his voice rough with unshed sentiment. "They saw your resolve, your grit." Sarah demurred. "No, Silas. They did it for us all. For the good of our little world. We're all intertwined, whether we acknowledge it or not." She hesitated, then turned toward him, her sightless eyes conveying a profound understanding. "And you, Silas, you rekindled my will to live. You revealed that even in the deepest darkness, a spark remains." He shifted, uneasy with such open gratitude. "I only did what anyone would have done." "No," she countered softly. "Not everyone possesses your heart. You saw potential in me that I myself had overlooked." The stillness descended again, thicker now, laden with unspoken feelings. Silas gazed out at the prairie, at the endless expanse stretching into the dim distance. He knew, with sudden clarity, that Sarah had also given him a precious gift, a reason to care, a purpose beyond his self-imposed isolation. Offering his hand, Silas said, "Come on. Let's get a feel for our new place." He led her carefully through the rough doorway, their hands joined firmly. Inside, the air was still and cool, the fragrance of pine stronger here. He guided her to the far side of the cabin, where a wide opening awaited a window. "Can you feel the wind, Sarah?" he inquired. She nodded, head tilted slightly. "Yes. It smells like rain." Silas inhaled deeply. The faint, earthy scent was unmistakable, carried on the whispering wind. "It's coming from the west," he observed. "A storm brewing." They stood together for what seemed like an eternity, feeling the cool draft on their faces, absorbing the sounds of the night prairie. The approaching storm, the incomplete structure, the unpredictable future, all loomed before them, yet standing side by side, the challenges seemed less formidable. The horizon was darkening, but they were undaunted. They were prepared. Sarah squeezed his hand. "A shared horizon," she murmured, "makes any burden lighter."